In 1620, 102 English colonists stepped off the Mayflower and into their first American winter. By spring, 45 of them were dead. 17 died in February alone. 13 of the 18 married women never saw summer. 4 entire families wiped from the earth. They had wool coats, they had iron tools, they had European medicine, and they rotted in the mud of Plymouth, coughing blood into rags they called handkerchiefs. Less than a mile away, through the same blizzards, the same freezing rain, the same bone-cracking cold, Wampanoag families slept warm, dry, and healthy. They didn't lose a single soul to the cold, not one. So who, exactly, was primitive? Here's what makes it stranger. Those English colonists believed that bathing was dangerous. They were convinced that water on the skin opened the body to disease. King Louis XIV of France, the most powerful man in Europe at the time, bathed 3 times in his entire life. 3. The man who built Versailles smelled worse than the stables behind it. When Tisquantum, the man the English called Squanto, tried to teach the colonists to wash themselves in rivers, they refused. They thought he was trying to make them sick. And the Wampanoag found one European habit particularly revolting. The colonists would blow their noses into a square of cloth, fold it up carefully, and slide it back into their pockets. They carried their own filth against their bodies, and they called it civilized. Now imagine this. It's an hour before dawn. Freezing rain is falling sideways. The wind doesn't just blow. It cuts through everything you're wearing and finds the skin underneath. Your fire behind you is dying, but you don't panic. You don't shiver and curse and scramble for shelter, because your grandmother taught you exactly what to do in this moment. And her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother before that. 1,000 years of women and men walking into freezing rain and walking back healthy. How? They didn't survive by accident. They didn't have one trick, one lucky discovery, one moment of genius. Every layer of clothing on their bodies, every smear of grease on their skin, every herb drying above the fire inside the lodge, every angle of the shelter, every food they chose to eat, every ritual they performed at dawn. It was all part of a system, built over centuries, passed from elder to child, from mother to daughter, from uncle to nephew, perfected over thousands of years before a single European sail appeared on the horizon. And here's what no one tells you. Freezing rain is the deadliest weather on Earth. Not blizzards, not dry cold, freezing rain. Because water steals body heat with a brutality that dry air never could. One wrong decision in freezing rain, and you're dead before the sun comes up. Before we go any further, if stories like this stir something in you, take a moment and subscribe. Every week, we uncover another chapter of native ingenuity the modern world has forgotten. In this video, you're going to discover the invisible shield they rubbed into their skin before every storm, the rain clothing that outperformed anything Europe produced for another 400 years, and the food that turned their own bodies into furnaces from the inside out. This isn't just history. This is knowledge that still works today. Welcome back to the story they didn't teach you in school. The Koyukon people of interior Alaska didn't see cold the way you and I see it. To them, cold wasn't weather. It was alive. A powerful, conscious spirit. One that watched you, tested you, and punished the arrogant. Elders told their children a warning they carried for the rest of their lives. Never brag that the cold cannot touch you. The moment you boast, it comes for you. This wasn't superstition. It was a survival philosophy wrapped in story. Because story is how you make a child remember something that might save their life. Respecting the cold meant following rules that kept you breathing. Never rush, never overexert, and above all, never let yourself sweat. Because moisture on the skin, in freezing temperatures, wasn't discomfort, it was a death sentence. Somewhere on the northern plains, a Lakota woman rises before dawn. Freezing rain taps against the buffalo hide above her head. She doesn't flinch. She reaches for a small pouch near the fire, the same pouch her mother carried, and her mother before her. She's done this 1,000 mornings. Her body knows the cold, and the cold, it knows her right back. Before she steps outside, she does something that would puzzle any European watching. She dips her fingers into that pouch by the fire and begins rubbing thick, rendered bear grease across her face, her neck, her wrists, her hands, every inch of skin the rain might find. This wasn't vanity, it was armor you couldn't see. Across dozens of nations, from the frozen interior of Alaska to the wet, dripping forests of the Northeast, bear grease was one of the most valuable substances a family could possess. They hunted bears not just for the meat, but for the thick layers of fat wrapped around the kidneys, the organs, the spine. That fat was carefully rendered over low flames, slow, patient work, until it became a smooth, nearly odorless grease. Then it was stored, and here's a detail most people never hear. They packed it inside scraped and dried deer bladders, sealed tight, carried on every journey, kept near the fire to stay soft through the coldest months. When rubbed into the skin, it created something remarkable. A hydrophobic layer, invisible, weightless, but absolute. Rain hit the surface and rolled off the way water slides down a duck's feather. Wind couldn't bite through it. The grease-sealed body heat underneath the skin and locked the cold on the outside where it belonged. But it didn't stop there. The same substance was rubbed into hides to keep leather from cracking and splitting in the cold. It was smoothed onto babies' skin to protect them through the night. In warmer months, it repelled biting insects. One single substance, carried in a pouch no bigger than a fist, doing the work of 5 modern products: waterproof spray, moisturizer, insect repellent, leather conditioner, wind barrier, all of it from one bear. The Europeans had nothing like it. They arrived in wool coats that soaked up rain like sponges and then froze solid against their bodies, stealing the very warmth they were meant to protect. The Lakota woman standing in freezing rain, her skin is dry. The rain hits her and slides off like she's made of stone. It never touches her. It never did. Now her skin is protected. But what about the rest of her body? The shoulders, the chest, the legs that have to carry her through miles of frozen ground. This is where it gets almost unbelievable. Thousands of miles to the northwest, along the wind-battered coasts of Alaska, the Yupik and Unangan peoples were sewing parkas out of intestines. Seal intestines, sea lion intestines, sometimes bear. They cleaned the gut walls until they were translucent, cut them into long, careful strips, and stitched them together with a waterproof seam so precise that every single needle hole was sealed shut from the inside. The result was a garment that shouldn't have been possible. The gut walls contained microscopic pores, large enough to let sweat vapor escape from the body, but far too small to let a single drop of rain pass through from the outside. It breathed. It was completely waterproof. It was light enough to fold into a pouch and flexible enough to paddle a kayak through Arctic surf. When GORE-TEX launched in the 1970s, the company called it a revolution in outdoor clothing. The Yupik had been wearing the same principle across their backs for thousands of years. They just never filed the patent. Further south, on the rain-soaked coast of the Pacific Northwest, Tlingit and Haida women harvested the inner bark of the western red cedar, a tree they considered sacred, a tree they called the tree of life. They split the bark into thin strips, shredded it, pounded it soft against stones, and wove it into dense, watertight capes that draped from shoulder to knee and shed rain the way a thatched roof sheds a downpour. Matching woven hats kept the head dry. An entire rain suit, grown from a living tree, woven by hand and tighter against water than anything a London tailor could produce. And then there was caribou, the peoples of the deep Arctic, Inupiaq, Athabaskan, Nunavut, built their winter clothing from caribou hides. Each caribou hair is hollow, a tiny sealed tube of trapped air. Thousands of them packed together created insulation so effective that nothing the modern world manufactured could match it until synthetic fill arrived in the 20th century. Wolverine fur went around the face, and only the face, because wolverine is the one fur on Earth that sheds frost from human breath instead of collecting it. Every other fur ices over. Wolverine stays dry. And across every one of these nations, plains, coast, Arctic, woodland, one rule held absolute: never let yourself sweat. Moisture against the skin in freezing temperatures was not discomfort. It was a death sentence walking beside you in your own clothing. She steps back inside, and this is where most people, even people who respect native history, get it completely wrong. They picture crude tents, animal skins thrown over a bundle of sticks, something temporary, something barely holding together against the wind. They couldn't be more wrong. A Sioux, Cheyenne, or Blackfoot tipi was an engineered structure, and every single detail existed for a reason that had been tested by generations of storms. The conical shape wasn't decoration. A cone sheds rain the way a steep roof does. Water hits the surface and runs straight to the ground. It never pools, it never collects long enough to soak through. The rain hits and it's gone. But the real genius was hidden on the inside. A liner, a second wall of hide, hung from the interior poles, creating a gap of still air between the outer cover and the living space. Any moisture that crept through the outer buffalo hide during a storm hit the liner and ran harmlessly down into the earth. The family inside never felt a drop. 2 walls, one simple, brilliant idea: total protection. Smoke flaps at the top could be adjusted from below with long poles, opened wide on clear nights for ventilation, cinched nearly shut during storms to seal out the rain, and all without ever stepping outside into the weather. Beneath the floor, heated rocks buried under packed earth radiated warmth upward through the night. Sharon Day, of the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, described the method her ancestors used: a pit dug into the center of the floor, stones heated in fire until they glowed, then buried, turning the earth itself into a slow-burning heater that held its warmth until morning. And when a family broke camp and moved, they carried fire with them. Fire horns, small vessels carved from hollowed animal horn or shaped from clay, were packed tight with fine ash and dry moss. A single live coal nestled in the center like a heartbeat. Miles of travel through freezing rain, wind tearing at their faces, and that coal stayed alive inside its shell. No family ever walked into a cold camp. No child ever arrived at a shelter without warmth waiting. In the wigwams of the eastern woodlands, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe, the Algonquin, heated stones were dropped into vessels of water inside the lodge, filling the enclosed space with warm, moist steam. It kept airways open. It kept throats from cracking in the brutal dry cold of winter. And a cracked, dry throat is exactly where sickness begins. It's the open door that lets illness walk in. They sealed that door shut with steam and stone. But here's the truth that changes everything. The part most people never stop to consider. It wasn't just the clothing. It wasn't just the shelters. It wasn't just the grease or the engineering or the cedar bark. Their bodies were different. Not by luck, not by genetics alone. Because they were built that way, deliberately, intentionally, from the very first day of life. Charles Eastman, whose Santee Sioux name was Ohiesa, meaning the winner, grew up in the old way, before the reservations changed everything forever. He lived it, and he wrote about it so the world would know. Among his people, when a baby boy was born, his older brother was expected to perform an act of hardship immediately. No delay, no hesitation, plunge into icy water, or if it was the dead of winter, strip naked and roll in the snow until the skin burned red. It was an announcement heard by the entire camp. A warrior has arrived, and the other children must answer with toughness of their own. This wasn't a one-time ceremony. This was how life worked. Children were raised to endure without a sound of complaint. They fasted, sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3, without food, without water, without showing a single flicker of weakness on their faces. Hard physical exercise was constant and relentless, not for sport, not for games, for the day that freezing rain would come and their body would need to answer. A body trained like that from childhood didn't panic when storms hit. It responded. The blood kept moving. The muscles stayed warm. The mind stayed sharp, while others fell apart. And then there were the sweat lodges. Entire families crowded into small, sealed structures, no bigger than a large closet. Water was poured over stones, heated until they glowed the color of sunset. The air inside became almost unbearable, so thick with steam it hurt to breathe. And then they stepped outside and plunged straight into a freezing river, or threw themselves into the snow. Heat to cold, cold to heat, again and again. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't suffering for the sake of tradition. It was maintenance, the same way you'd sharpen a blade before a hunt, or oil a bowstring before a storm. They were tuning their bodies, keeping them ready for the exact moment that freezing rain would come and ask what they were made of. And for thousands of years, their bodies answered. So their skin was shielded, their clothing answered the rain, their shelters held the warmth. Their bodies were hardened from the day they were born. But what happened when, despite all of it, a cough crept in, a fever started to climb, a sore throat began to burn in the middle of the night? This is where most people assume they simply suffered through it, gritted their teeth, hoped for the best, and waited for the sickness to pass. They didn't hope. They walked outside and picked the cure off the ground. Across the Great Plains, the Lakota and other Plains nations knew a purple wildflower that grew low and stubborn in the grasslands, Echinacea, the purple coneflower. They pulled it from the earth, chewed the bitter root, crushed the leaves into hot water, and drank it as tea, and the sickness pulled back. Sore throats eased, fevers broke, infections that could have killed a European settler shivering in a damp wool coat, handled, quietly, by a woman with a plant and a clay cup. The Cherokee and Ojibwe did something that still astonishes. They stripped the inner bark from willow trees that grew along rivers and streams, the same trees that bent in the wind but never broke, and brewed that bark into a bitter, powerful tea. It killed pain. It broke fevers. It calmed swelling. Centuries later, European chemists would finally isolate the active compound inside that bark, salicin, and turn it into the most widely used medicine in human history, aspirin. The Cherokee had been drinking it for 1,000 years before anyone in a European laboratory gave it a name. The Blackfeet, Dakota, Cheyenne, and Crow burned bundles of white sage inside their lodges and sweat lodges. The smoke that filled the room wasn't just ceremonial. It carried compounds that killed bacteria and viruses hanging in the enclosed air. They were disinfecting their living spaces with fire and herb, generations before any European understood what a germ even was. Cedar, sacred to the peoples of the Pacific Northwest, was brewed into tea and inhaled as thick, fragrant steam to open blocked airways and fight infection deep in the chest. The Iroquois and Cherokee dug golden seal root from the forest floor and ground it into remedies so potent that the active compound inside, berberine, fights infection as aggressively as anything sold behind a modern pharmacy counter today. And the woodland tribes carried American ginseng on long winter journeys, a root that calmed the body's panic during weeks of relentless cold, keeping the spirit steady when everything outside was trying to break it. They didn't have hospitals. They didn't have pharmacies with fluorescent lights and plastic bottles. They had the forest and the rivers and the plains and the meadows. And for thousands of years, the land provided everything they needed to stay alive. The forest was their pharmacy, and it never once closed its doors. But medicine only works after something has already gone wrong. What they truly mastered, what separated them from every European who froze in the same weather, was making sure things rarely went wrong in the first place. And that started with what they put into their mouths every single day. Among northern nations, the most important food wasn't meat. It was fat, not a side dish, not a small piece trimmed off the edge. Fat made up the overwhelming majority of what they consumed. And the most prized fat of all, the thick, dense, white layer packed tight around the kidneys of buffalo, elk, and moose. Hunters carried it back to camp before anything else. Women divided it carefully among families, because that fat didn't just fill the belly. It burned slow and steady inside the body, producing heat for hours, the way a buried coal holds its warmth long after the fire has gone dark. They pounded dried meat into thin shreds, mixed it with crushed wild berries, chokecherries, Saskatoon berries, sometimes cranberries, and folded it all into rendered fat. The result was pemmican, a food that weighed almost nothing, lasted for years without spoiling, and could fuel a human body through the worst blizzard the northern plains could throw at it. One handful, the size of a fist, and the body had everything it needed: protein, fat, vitamins from the berries, a complete meal you could carry in a pouch and eat while walking through a storm. Bones were never thrown away, never. They were cracked open, dropped into water, and boiled for hours until the marrow, the collagen, the minerals all dissolved into a thick, golden broth. Drunk hot, straight from the vessel, it warmed the body from the center outward, chest first, then arms, then legs, then the tips of the fingers and toes. Heat radiating from the inside like a fire lit beneath the ribs. A Spanish explorer named Cabeza de Vaca, one of the first Europeans to walk deep into the American interior, described meeting native people in Texas who could chase a deer on foot for an entire day without stopping. He had never seen human beings move like that. No European he had ever known could come close. These were bodies built on fat and broth and pemmican, fueled by the land itself. A body fed like that doesn't get sick standing in the rain. It burns right through it. We call it waterproof engineering. They called it getting dressed in the morning. We call it alternative medicine. They called it breakfast. We call it extreme cold exposure training. They called it waking up on a Tuesday. Everything you've just heard, the bear grease rubbed into the skin before dawn, the gut skin parkas stitched from seal intestine, the cedar bark capes woven from a living tree, the heated stones buried beneath the lodge floor, the sweat lodges followed by freezing rivers, the purple coneflower pulled from the plains, the willow bark tea the Cherokee drank 1,000 years before Europe invented aspirin, the pemmican, the bone broth drunk hot while the wind screamed outside. None of it was invented in a laboratory. None of it was written in a textbook. None of it came from a university or a government program. It was carried in memory, spoken around fires that burned in the same spots for generations, handed from grandmother to granddaughter, from uncle to nephew, from elder to child, in voices so quiet the wind almost took them. For thousands of years, without a single word ever written down, and not a single piece of it was lost, until someone else decided it should be. That Lakota woman, the one who rose before dawn at the beginning of this story, she's been outside for over an hour now. Freezing rain is still falling. Her skin is dry beneath the grease. Her body is warm beneath caribou fur. Her throat is clear. Her breathing is steady. Her children are still asleep inside a shelter that answers the storm with nothing but silence. She isn't surviving. She's living, the same way her people always have. If this story changed the way you see the past, subscribe and become part of this rediscovery. Every week, we open another chapter the modern world chose to forget. Next time, we step inside the one place no outsider was ever invited. How Native Americans raised their children behind closed doors. The methods were extraordinary, and most of them, the modern world has never heard.